Retro Road Test, 1992 Ford Granada 2.0 v LANCIA THEMA 2.0. In the early 1990s, the executive saloon segment in the UK was an eclectic mix of comfort, character and bargain-laden company car deals. Among them sat two rather different propositions: the stout, no-nonsense Ford Granada 2.0 and the Italianate LANCIA THEMA 2.0. Both promised to get you to the golf club, the client meeting, or the in-laws with dignity intact, but they went about it in markedly different ways. On paper, they wore similar badges: 4 wheels, 2.0-litre petrol engines, seating for 5, and enough interior space to hide last week's newspapers. But in reality, these were cars that spoke contrasting automotive dialects: Birmingham versus Turin, sensible versus stylish, albeit the Italian's style occasionally wandered off in a whimsical direction. After a week alternating between the pair, predominantly on British B roads, motorways and the occasional sea road varnished in well-meaning rain, here's how they compare. First impressions. Ford Granada 2.0. From the outside, the Granada comes across as the grown-up you'd trust with your house keys: solid, familiar and slightly dull. It's quintessentially Ford: big, squared-off headlights, a broad grille, and proportions that scream "I have business to do." There's good reason why it became the staple of company car fleets in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Climb in and you're greeted by a cabin that marries practicality with a faint whiff of office car park. The dashboard is broad, the buttons are large, and the materials are robust. You can tell this interior is designed to outlast coffee spills, shopping bags and the odd impatient sales rep slamming the door with a "see you at 5, mate." The seats are generous and supportive in that firm, business-like way, not quite dental chair firm, but close. The driving position is upright and sensible, like someone who wears socks with sandals and owns several pairs of chinos. LANCIA THEMA 2.0. Now this is the car that perhaps styles itself on espresso and opera rather than meeting minutes. The Thema wears its Italian lineage with a sort of subtle swagger, slightly more curved lines than the Granada, a grille that nods to heritage and headlights that say, "You might want to look twice." Step inside and, the Italian flair becomes abundantly clear. The interior isn't outlandish, but there's an elegance that the Granada doesn't quite muster. Soft touch surfaces, a dash layout that feels picked rather than penciled in, and switchgear that, while still robust, suggests a lightly more cultured upbringing. The seats are supportive in that wonderfully comfortable way that seems to say, "We are here for you." Leather-optioned examples in particular feel like they were designed after careful consideration of human anatomy, rather than a checklist of cost per unit. 2 engines and performance. The specs. Both cars are powered by naturally aspirated 2.0-litre petrol engines, very 1992, with enough power to keep pace with traffic, yet not so much that you begin imagining you're in a group rally car. In imperial measurements, these engines typically produced somewhere in the mid-100 bhp range, more than adequate for cruising motorways and overtaking on country roads with a shrug and a mild curse at slower traffic. Ford Granada 2.0. Turn the key and the Granada grumbles to life in a manner reminiscent of a gentle sigh. It's not particularly raughty, nor is it refined in the way a modern car might be. But it settles into a steady idle and is perfectly willing to get on with the job. On the move, the engine delivers a predictable delivery of power. You won't be catching supercars at traffic lights, not that anyone's trying to in a Granada, but it will happily scoot along at 70-80 miles per hour on the motorway, and with a flick of the wrist you can deploy enough urge to overtake a weary lorry. The gearbox, a 5-speed manual in our tester, engages with a satisfyingly positive action. It's not as slick as some of its German rivals, but it's reassuringly mechanical. Push on a bit and you'll hear a touch more engine noise than in the Lancia, but it stays civilized without turning into an opera house of mechanical shrieks. And if you're stuck behind a tractor on a country lane, no drama, just slot another cog down, nudge your navigator's elbow apologetically, and trundle past with all the grace of someone in sensible footwear. LANCIA THEMA 2.0. The Thema's 2.0 engine feels a touch more cultured. There's less vibration and a slightly smoother delivery across the rev range. Italian engineers evidently spent a little more time convincing this motor to be agreeable at all speeds, from town crawling to motorway cruising. Press the throttle and the Lancia seems happier to rev, gaining speed with a light-footedness the Granada merely hints at. You still won't be chasing down hot hatches, but within its class, the Thema feels spirited in a relaxed sort of way. The gearbox in the Lancia is similarly positive, with shorter throws and a slightly more refined action. Rowing through the gears is rather like moving through the chapters of a good book, purposeful, satisfying, and just a touch emotional. On the motorway, the Thema feels stable and composed, with a hint of Italian charm in the way it deals with crosswinds and road imperfections. It's not magic, but it's more confident than you might expect from a 1992 executive saloon. 3. Ride and handling. Ford Granada 2.0. This is where the Granada's character truly shines, or at least shows its practical stripes. The ride is firm without being harsh. Ford's suspension tuning favors stability and load-bearing capability, the sort of calm reassurance you want when carrying passengers or luggage to somewhere important, such as an airport or a seaside hotel. On British B roads, you feel connected to the surface beneath, and there's a reassuring heft to the steering that keeps you honest in corners. It won't tuck into bends with the aplomb of a sports saloon, but it won't embarrass itself either. Think of it as the automotive equivalent of a dependable Labrador, keen, predictable and utterly trustworthy. Body control is good, with only modest roll on tighter bends. Push harder and it'll start to protest with a mild sense of protestation via tire squeal, rather than outright panic. It's confident, if a little conservative. One small caveat: on particularly rough or broken surfaces, the firmness can telegraph imperfections into the cabin. It's not uncomfortable, but you'll be aware of potholes as soon as you see them, no surprises there. LANCIA THEMA 2.0. The Thema rides with a slightly softer demeanor. Its suspension seems tuned with comfort as a priority, offering a smoother ride over imperfections than the Granada. British roads can be unkind, but the Thema absorbs mid-speed bumps with a confident poise and minimal fuss. Where the Granada feels like a solid handshake, the Thema feels like a reassuring hug. It's more supple over undulating surfaces and better insulated from sharp intrusions of harshness. In terms of handling, the Lancia's lighter steering and more refined chassis tune give it a slightly more playful character. It's not a sports car by any stretch, but there's a nimbleness about it that makes twisty roads more entertaining. Lean is controlled, responses are measured, and you have just enough connection to feel engaged without ever worrying you're pushing beyond reason. However, there's a trade-off. At higher speeds on motorways, the float of the softer suspension means you have to be more conscious of wind and road disturbances. It's never unpleasant, just marginally less assured than the Ford's firmer setup. 4. Practicality and usability. Ford Granada 2.0. In the practicality stakes, the Granada scores highly. The cabin is spacious, with generous headroom and legroom in both front and rear. 3 adults in the back won't be cozy, but neither will they be fighting for elbow space. Boot space is cavernous by 1992 standards. You could happily pack golf clubs, luggage and a picnic without feeling like you're playing automotive Tetris. The opening is wide, the floor is flat, and everyday usability gets a tick without hesitation. Controls are large, intuitive and generally well laid out. There's no need to consult the manual to operate the ventilation system, stereo or trip computer, and that's a blessing on cold, wet mornings when your brain's still calculating how many sugars are in your coffee. Visibility is good all round, thanks to large glass areas and upright pillars. This makes maneuvering in car parks and tight lanes simpler, a hidden but very welcome tray in a car of this size. LANCIA THEMA 2.0. The Thema is similarly practical. Rear passengers enjoy decent space, though the roofline's slightly more rakish shape means headroom, while ample, isn't quite as generous as in the Granada. Still, most adults will be comfortable for longer journeys. The boot is well-sized, competitive with the Granada, and the opening is wide enough to accommodate awkward-shaped loads. There's nothing to complain about here, except that certain trim options did slightly nick space from usable boot depth. Switchgear is a bit more elegant and, in a refreshing change, doesn't feel like an office photocopier slapped onto a steering column. Some drivers might find the array of buttons and toggles slightly more serious than Ford's more straightforward layout, but it's intuitive once you're accustomed. Visibility is decent, although the more swept-back rear window and thicker pillars slightly reduce rearward sight lines compared to the Granada. Thankfully, the mirrors are well-sized to compensate. Comfort and refinement. Ford Granada 2.0. The Granada's cabin is quiet enough at cruising speeds, with tire and wind noise kept at bay most of the time. Engine noise comes through under acceleration, but never intrusively. In many respects, the Granada's refinement is exactly what you'd hope for, present when needed, absent when not. Seats are supportive for long journeys, though the firm nature may not be everyone's cup of tea. After several hours on a motorway, you notice you've been sat in something practical rather than plush. There's a certain no-nonsense charm to it, but if your back starts sending subtle protest signals, you'll start to wish for slightly plusher padding. The heating and ventilation system works efficiently, with clear controls and effective airflow. If there's one place the Granada errs towards sensible rather than sumptuous, it's here, but that's no bad thing in a car built with duty in mind. LANCIA THEMA 2.0. Refinement in the Thema is one of its strongest cards. The cabin feels quieter and more composed at cruising speeds. Engine noise is well suppressed, and even on rougher road surfaces, the intrusion is limited. Seats in the Lancia are genuinely comfortable, with support that eases long journeys rather than bravely tolerates them. The materials feel a touch richer, the contours a little more considered. Spend a few hours at motorway speeds and you're likely to emerge with fewer complaints from your body than in the Granada. The heating and ventilation system is competent, not revolutionary, but it complements the overall ambience well. Controls feel satisfying and precise, subtly reinforcing the sense that you're in a car that was designed with care rather than calculation. 6. Personality and ownership. Ford Granada 2.0. To own a Granada is to own reliability and straightforwardness. This car says, "I will get you there, don't worry." It's the automotive equivalent of a proper briefcase rather than a flashy messenger bag. There's comfort in its familiarity, and endearing honesty in its lack of pretense. Maintenance and servicing are predictably easy and affordable, thanks to widespread parts and a huge network of Ford dealers. You won't be calling your local mechanic in a frenzied panic. In all likelihood, they'll already know your car's quirks and habits by first name. LANCIA THEMA 2.0. Owning a Thema is a slightly more characterful experience. There's an Italian flavor to everything, from the way it corners to the way the interior feels. It whispers rather than shouts, but its personality is unmistakable. Parts and servicing might not be quite as ubiquitous as for the Ford, but by 1992 Lancia had solid representation in the UK, and many owners cherished this car precisely because it felt a little different. Yes, you might raise an eyebrow at some of the more eccentric switchgear locations, or the way the air vents swivel with a subtle theatrical flair, but that's all part of the charm. It's not just transport, it's character on wheels. 7 Verdict. So how do these two executive saloons compare when settled back in 1992 UK spec with 2.0-litre engines? Aspect Ford Granada 2.0 Lancia Thema 2.0. Styling sensible, solid elegant, a touch Italian. Engine and performance predictable, reliable smooth, slightly more refined. Ride and handling firm and confident, comfortable and composed. Practicality excellent, very good. Comfort and refinement good, better. Personality dependable, distinctive. If you're after unwavering reliability, ease of ownership, and no-nonsense practicality, the Granada is a stalwart choice. It's like the dependable friend who always turns up with a flask and a spare tire. If, on the other hand, you want a little more refinement and character, with an indulgent edge that turns mundane journeys into agreeable ones, the Thema delivers. It's the friend who brings biscotti and a smile, even on a damp Tuesday. In the end, neither car is a bad choice, just different flavors of sensible. The Granada is the dependable workhorse, and the Thema is the cultured companion who happens to do the school run just as well. Choose the Granada for steadfast reliability and practicality. Choose the Thema if you desire a dash of continental charm with your commute.